Hello again, folks. This is Gary Hudson of Folkstone Guitars. I'd like to bring you a series of videos on the subject of myths about guitars. And these are some of the things that I myself at one time had believed. I know that I often hear customers say some of these things, so I understand why some people might believe these things because pretty much when you get a guitar and you don't have any background as a tech, you pretty much have to go by what other people say. Sometimes you have a guitar player who's like your mentor, or maybe a guitar instructor, or maybe it's a music store, and they tell you these things, but that doesn't always mean that they are true. So I'm going to be talking in this video about the first set of myths, and this subject of this video is going to be on guitar strings. I want to talk to you about guitar strings and some of the most misunderstood things about guitar strings. First of all, myth number one: strings go dead because they wear out. This is something that is commonplace to hear. My strings have worn out on my guitar, so they've gone dead. Well, actually, the string itself did not wear out. What has happened is your string has corroded. Guitar strings go dead because they rust. They rust because of the oil, our body oils from our hands. And I know a lot of you players are probably saying, duh, to this. I know a lot of you guys already know this, but there are people who actually don't know these things. So you must allow a little time to go by on this tape for these things that you already know so we can get to some of the things you may not know. Okay, good. Thank you. Your body oils get on your strings and they cause your strings to corrode. One of the things that I have found very helpful in eliminating the problem is using something I call, it's a product that you can buy over the counter, usually at Guitar Center, or you can order it online. It's called Finger Ease, and it also makes the playing a lot easier on your strings. I mean, you can just slide your hand so easily when you play with this stuff. But you just take a little bit of it like this. When you first pick up your guitar, you take a little bit of it and you spray it on there like this. Just a little bit, doesn't take very much. And then you just kind of wipe it with your hand like this. And it just makes things so smooth. I mean, it's just nice and slick. You can just play all over. And this stuff usually lasts. I mean, I've sprayed it on there and it's just lasted for hours. It just stays nice and slick, but it provides sort of a barrier to your body oils so that when you go to wipe your strings off, and I hope you do wipe your strings off every time that you play your guitar. Let me just grab a little paper towel here and I'll illustrate what I'm talking about. You wipe your strings off when you're done playing. If you have used the Finger Ease, if you've sprayed you've got your strings lubricated with this stuff and you've been playing with this stuff on your strings, when you go to wipe your strings off, what you'll find is that the body oils and the grit comes off with that Finger Ease. It's like a lubricant that allows that stuff to come off a lot easier. You'll find that your strings, personally, I've found that strings can last 2 and 3 times longer by using this stuff. So it's just a little tip there on what really makes a string go bad. What makes it go bad is your body oil. If you've ever seen an upright piano with the lid off and looked down at the strings inside, I remember the first time I did that as a kid and I saw all these strings. I saw straight strings like on a guitar and I saw coil strings like on a guitar. But the thing about those strings is they don't corrode, I mean, that easily because human beings never touch them. Those strings are not played by human hands. They are played by keys and hammers inside the piano. So piano strings don't have to be changed nearly as often as guitar strings because guitar strings are in contact with our hand here if we're not using a pick, or if we are using a pick, there's still body oils that are collecting here and here. I mean, we're just all over the thing, and it's really uh, uh, causing a problem because we're sweating on this thing. We're putting our body oils on these strings, and the strings are rusting and rusting and rusting. And when they rust to a point where they just don't sound clear anymore, they don't have that nice ring anymore, then the strings are dead at that point. So that's why strings wear out, because they corrode. All right, myth number 2 about strings. You should always loosen your strings on your guitar if you are storing it for a long time. If you're going to store your guitar for a long, I've heard people say this for years. If you're going to store a guitar, if you're going to put it away in a closet somewhere for a long, long time, like 6 months or a year, if you're going to store your guitar, the best thing to do is loosen all the strings. I mean, loosen them all the way down. Actually, that is really the worst thing you could do to your guitar, is loosen all the strings. The reason is that the neck of the guitar is constructed in such a way, and majority of them have truss rods, as you know, to allow for string tension. String tension is actually, I mean, good for a neck. I mean, string tension at 440 tuning is the right thing. It's what the neck is made for. And when you relieve all that tension from the neck and you let the neck sit for like months or God forbid years, if you do that, what'll happen is the neck will bow down against the direction of the string tension. It'll bow down, and sometimes when you string it up again, it doesn't want to straighten back up. I've had guitars that have been brought to me that have been stored for like 6 months or 8 months, however it may be. And the customer wants me to string it up and set it up. They said, I've had this guitar in retirement for a while. I've decided I want to bring it out of retirement. I want to put a bone saddle on it or whatever. It can be an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar. And I'll go to string it up, and there have been times when that neck would not straighten up, simply because the neck had been bowed down for so long that it's sort of petrified like that, and the truss rod can actually get to where, you know, it doesn't want to turn in that situation. So it's best to just leave your strings. Just if you want to tune them down a little bit, maybe a half step, that's nothing wrong with that. But really, don't loosen the strings all the way up when you're storing your guitar. Now, it might be a good idea to loosen the strings all the way up if you're traveling and your guitar is in the trunk of the car for hundreds of miles, or if you're flying on an airplane and your guitar is down in the baggage compartment of a plane. That might be a good idea to loosen the strings, but that's only going to be for a few hours. You don't want to loosen all the strings on your guitar and store it. When you store your guitar, store it tuned up. All right? All right. Myth number 3. Larger gauge strings have better intonation than lighter gauge strings. Larger gauge strings have better intonation than lighter gauge strings. Now, do they really? No, they don't. And you know, there's no way that you'll convince me that an 11, for example, on an electric guitar has better intonation than a 9 set of strings, or that 13s on an acoustic guitar has better intonation than 11s or 10s on an acoustic guitar. It's just not true. What happens is this: when you get it sounds that way because when you get a lighter gauge string on a guitar and you press down when you fret, what is happening with a lighter gauge string is it is stretching. It is more prone to stretch as you mash down on the fret space between the fret wire. Because it has more elasticity, it is actually causing the note to go sharper at that point with the same action that you would have on a heavier gauge string. So it just sounds as if the intonation is changing, but it's really not. There is no difference as far as the quality of intonation between a lighter gauge string and a heavier gauge string. They're going to intonate the same way. The key is in the setup. The key to really getting them to intonate properly and sound properly and play correctly for you is to have a good setup on your guitar. Everything is in the setup on a guitar. Very, very important that setups are done correctly. All right, let's see what else I got here. Myth number 4. Strings through the back of the guitar, through the body, is more sustained and better tone than strings through the top. You know, like on a Telecaster where you've got the strings going through the body of the guitar, rather than, and there are some Telecasters where they are strung through the top of the bridge, but we're always told that if the strings go through the body, there's going to be more sustain. Actually, that's not the case at all. Actually, it's much better to have a Telecaster bridge with the strings going through the top. You say, how can that be? I've never heard that before. Well, I'm going to tell you. Here's the reason. First of all, the distance a string has to travel from the saddle to the ball, the end of the string, going through the body or coming through the top on a tailpiece, the longer the distance, the less sustain you're going to have with a string. All right, so the shorter the distance here, the shorter that the distance that the string has to travel once it goes over the saddle, and it's wherever that stop point is, whether it's a stop bar on a Les Paul or wherever it is, the shorter that distance, the more sustain you're going to have. The longer that distance, the less sustain you're going to have. Like a Fender Jazzmaster guitar, for example, has a long string path all the way back to the tailpiece, much longer than a Strat or a Tele, because those were jazz guitars and they were set up to not have so much sustain. They were set up for quick notes. Have you ever seen these jazz guitars? I'm sure you have. The old Gibsons, the arch tops with the trapeze tailpieces and the long tailpieces going back, and you'll see how the strings are pulled over an arch top bridge, a movable bridge there, and the string has a long travel point. Those are preferred by jazz players simply because they don't have a lot of sustain. Whereas a blues guitar or a rock guitar, normally you'll want to have more sustain than that. So you'll play something like a Les Paul or a Strat or a Tele. Now a Tele that is strung through the back actually has less sustain than one that is strung through the top. And you say, well, how can that be? I've always heard that it had more sustain and more tone. Well, first of all, sustain does not equal tone. All right, those are two different things. Sustain and tone are two different things. One has to do with how long the note is held, how long the thing rings, right? All right, what does it have to do with tone? Nothing at all. Tone is equalization and everything else. That's a totally different realm. All right, so it's not going to give it better tone if it strings through the body. All right, the reason why, as I was explaining earlier, that the string has more sustain if it actually comes through the top. If you've got a Tele bridge where the strings go through the top, and by the way, we are building several custom Teles here right now, and you'll be seeing these on Facebook soon, I hope, shortly. And they are all strung through the top. I purposely bought bridges that where the strings will string through the back, and there's a shorter string travel. Why? Well, less string breakage for one thing. The string does not have to go through the body, through a ferrule, through the body, and then make a real sharp turn at the bridge plate and come through a little porthole and then go up over the saddle before it gets out here where you can play the thing. No, the strings just come right through the back, and there they are, locked into the back of the bridge. They just come right back through here. For example, I've got my, some of you have seen this already on Facebook, my Beatles 12-string electric here that we just finished. Scotty Young did a tremendous job of finishing this thing for us here, and this thing is just awesome. I'll play it for you sometime on a tape. But this one has a Cateau 12-string bridge, and these are great. I mean, each saddle can adjust intonation, so each saddle intonates for each string, which makes it better than a Rickenbacker 12-string electric, by the way. And you've got 6 going through the back here. 6 strings. I don't know if you, I guess you, yeah, see that? 6 strings going through the back of the bridge on the top, and then you've got 6 strings going through the body. And notice that the unevenness here a little bit of these ferrules, and that is because this is a 12-string, and you've got every other string intonating differently, and actually the holes on this bridge plate are exactly that unevenness coming out the back. So that's the reason that is the way it is. So you got 6 going through here and 6 going through the top. And you know what? One string sustains just about as good as the other. I mean, each one has great equal tone. Um, Sounds just fine. The strings that come through the top, don't have any problem with them at all. They sound wonderful. So, that's just a little tip on string through the body versus string through the top. It's one of those things that, people talk about sometimes. They always have got to find that Tele or that Fender P bass, with the strings going through the body. And by the way, a Fender P bass, if you've got a string through the body, Fender bass, all right, normally that's a P bass that does that. If you've got strings going through the body, then you've probably got a bridge that allows you to string it both through the back of the bridge or through the body. And I would advise you, if you have your bass strung with the strings going through the body, the next time you change your strings, please string it through the back of the bridge. You say, why? Because you'll break G strings all the time. If you play hard enough, you will break that G string on a P bass if it's strung through the body. I know people have done it, and they've come to me with the problem, saying, why do I keep breaking G strings on my bass? I've never seen a bass break a string before. Well, you can sure break them, and it'll make a believer out of you. If you string it that way, you'll find a typical set of like GHS boomers. That G string will break right off. That's the smallest string, and when you come up through the back of the guitar, and that string has to angle like it does, it's a large string. Okay, it's a large wound string. It's not as large as the others, but it's a large wound string. And what it does, I don't know why it's so typical of the G itself, but that string is like bent and like metal. When you bend it back and forth enough, if you play on that string, just playing on it, the string flux will cause that metal to bend back and forth over that saddle, and it'll break. It'll break. So string it up through the back, and it won't hurt sustain or tone whatsoever. All right, let's see. Myth number 5 on strings. String action should be as low as possible. String action should be as low as possible. This is one myth that I heard from Eddie Van Halen. Somebody asked him, Eddie, how low is your, how do you have your action set up on your guitars? He says, as low as possible. Well, is that really a good thing to have the action as low as possible? It's actually better to have your action as high as you can comfortably play it. Let me repeat that. It is not good to have your action as low as you can get it, because you can get action pretty low. I mean, if you play light, you can get it way down there. If you get the truss rod just right and the nut just right and the saddles, you can get a setup going, I mean, low. But the real truth is, you should set up your action as high as you can comfortably play it. Okay? You should set your action up as high as you can comfortably play it. Why? Because you might not notice it, but if you've got real low action on your guitar, you've got less sustain, you've got less tone, and your strings are just not going to have that good full sound. They're going to be fretting out somewhere. The closer that you are playing them to that fingerboard, the closer they are down there, the less ring and tone the strings are going to have. In fact, I've heard guys that have had me set up their guitars real low, and they'll take a heavy pick and sit down and play the thing really hard, and it's just going plink, 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 plink. You can't hear a note at all. I mean, you can't hear that nice toot, 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 toot. Strings have to breathe, okay? They have to breathe. Let your strings breathe. Raise them up a little bit. Just keep raising them, raising them. You'd be surprised how much high action you can play with. And if you really want to play with some great medium action, try tuning a half step down. a lot of people say that the guitar sounds better. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan, it was good for him. Hendrix, Andre Segovia, they all played with a half step down and tuned to E flat. I personally prefer it on most of my guitars, and it's a lot easier to play that way. I mean, you can set it up, you can use heavier gauge strings, you can set the action up a little higher, and I mean, brother, let me tell you, you'll find that you'll have a lot prettier tones coming out of that guitar. I mean, it'll be sweeter, the notes will be more round, they'll be full, and be quiet because your strings have to breathe. Now we're going to get to this thing about finishes, you know, on guitars. You know how people say that the finish has to breathe or the wood has to breathe. We're going to talk about that on another video. But you know what really needs to breathe on a guitar? The strings. The strings. Play your guitar with the action as high as you can comfortably play it. And your guitar will sound better, and your performance will sound better, and everybody will be happier. All right, and lastly, number 6, myth number 6 I'm going to cover on, and there's probably some string myths that you've heard of before. If you've got some suggestions for this video, please send them or put a comment here below. I would appreciate it. Here's another one. Relic guitars. Now, these are these guitars that you can buy with the finish, you know, half sanded off. There's a guy in, I won't mention his name, real popular guitar assembler in Nashville who sells copies of Strats and Tellys. He buys all the bodies and necks from Warmoth, and he just barely paints them, and he scuffs them up and scratches them up and everything and puts nice electronics in them. They're pretty good guitars, overpriced, but they're okay. And everybody wants those Relic guitars because, boy, they sound better. Let me tell you, man, it might look old. It might have some rusty screws on it. Wait a minute. You know, I have actually had in here some of these Relic guitars, and I've noticed that the hardware is already corroded for you. Well, isn't that nice? I've really got a vintage look here, don't I? I've got a half rusted out tailpiece, and I've got a rusty tremolo bar. I've got rusted pickguard screws. Ain't I something? Let me tell you something, my friend. If you've got any rust at any point on a guitar, the strings will not last as long. Did you hear what I said? If you have any place on the guitar where you've got rust going, rust is like a cancer. Rust will spread. And the quicker rust goes to your strings, the quicker they go dead. Okay? Now, if you've got pickguard screws, for example, that are starting to rust out, replace them. Get some new pickguard screws. Order from Stuart McDonald. They'll sell you a whole pack of stainless steel pickguard screws. I highly recommend them. Often I'll just throw in stainless steel screws in a setup. If a guitar comes in here, a bass or a Strat or a Tele, and it's got rusted screws all around the pickguard, I'll just go ahead and replace them with stainless steel for the customer. Oftentimes I don't even charge for those things. If you can get stainless steel screws for any hardware on the guitar, get stainless. If you can get stainless to hold your tuners on, if you can get stainless to hold your tremolo in place, if you can get stainless to hold your switch on, I mean, any place you can get stainless steel, get it for your guitar, because that's going to be less rust on your strings. So I'm far from believing that Relic guitars sound better just because they've got some finish worn off and a little bit of wood grain exposed, because you know, there's going to be a lot of rusty strings on those things pretty quick, I think, especially if there's a lot of rusted hardware. If you've got a rusty tailpiece, if you've got rust that's starting on your saddles, you look down there and you see brown all over those saddle screws, and you just see corrosion setting in, man, take it to a tech, a repair shop like Folkestone, or find out how to do it on YouTube or something, or take that tailpiece off and detail that thing, oil that thing up, get rid of that rust and keep it gone, because it's going to just wear your strings out quicker. Let me tell you where rust really does its thing on a guitar. You know at what point rust is really working on the strings on a guitar? You say, as well, it's out when I'm playing a gig. No, it's not. It's after you play the gig and you put the guitar in the case and you close the lid. When you enclose rusty hardware, a rusted hardware guitar in a case, and it's got new strings on it, that rust begins to just oxidize inside that case in that environment. That thing is sealed in there. And you got a nice greenhouse effect going on with your strings, and they're all going to rust out quicker. I mean, strings cost enough. Why would you want to rust them out any quicker than they're already being rusted out by just playing the things? It's best to replace all your rusted hardware or clean it up as best you can. And check your black screws, check your black hardware or your gold hardware. Quite often it gets rusted, it gets corroded up. Well, I guess I'll bring to an end now the first in this series of videos. I don't know how many we're going to do here. I've got a whole list of here about 18 guitar myths that I'm going to be covering. The first 6 here had to do today with strings. This has been a little longer than I thought it would be, but that's always what happens here when I start talking. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and you say, well, I didn't learn anything. I already knew all that crap, Gary. Well, fine. Thanks for hanging out anyway. All right, and you have a real good day, and stay tuned.